For those who have been following the build, look at it. It's finally starting to look like a motorcycle. Well, almost. Maybe a little bit patchy with the odd colours at the moment, but it finally has some shape. And I'm going to be honest, this project has taken way longer than I anticipated. But anyway, enough of the moaning. Let's roll the clocks back 2 weeks to when some goodies arrived. As I mentioned in the early episodes, I wanted to build a road registered race bike. Not to do any racing with, I just love that clean look of no lights, no mirrors, and here in the UK we have a wonderful thing called a daytime MOT. The good news is our friends over at GRPone had just the kit I required, which was a fiberglass race kit. And I'm going to be honest, I wasn't sure what to expect because in the past I've fitted fiberglass stuff and it's always been hit or miss, but the reviews look great and it certainly was going to do the job from what I could see looking at the images. So when I contacted them and said I'm going to need one of your kits, they were straight on the case of getting one put together to get sent out to us. So let's see what it's all about. Now sadly, before I had an opportunity to fit any of this bodywork, I was going to need to try and have some sort of bike put back together. And the last time you guys saw it, I'd lost all of my skin on my fingers sanding back that frame to give it that polished alley look. So it was going to be the swing arm next. So I've covered everything in ACF 50 on the swing arm because I want to try and undo the bolts that go through here. I'm also going to put some heat on there because I really could do about these snapping like in the donor swing arm. So we've also got all the bodywork under the bench. I'm keen to get the frame on the bench, the swing arm on in this episode, and get the bike mocked up with the bodywork on so we can have a good look at how it's going to stand. We've also got the cylinder head back from PGME and the barrel, so that's been machined down. Thanks Paul, top work mate, it looks fantastic. So we've got that squish correct hopefully now when I bolt it back on. But yeah, I don't think this is going to be a 2-minute job, unfortunately. So let's start the cameras rolling. Armed with some MAP gas, I was able to apply a little bit of heat to the swing arm. I didn't want to go mad and melt the rear fender, but ultimately I wanted enough heat in there that it would expand and make the removal of the bolts a little bit easier. As you'll see from these next clips, there's not really too much to overlay in here, just stripping an old dirty swing arm to bits and preparing for the reassembly, hopefully in this episode. So whilst I'm pulling apart the swing arm, I want to say thanks to those who have recently donated on the super thanks through YouTube. This was actually something completely new to me. I didn't even know it was a thing, and then all of a sudden I started getting, I can only describe them as a tip, because it started getting a couple of dollars here and there, which is pretty cool. So thank you to all those that have supported the channel. Obviously all the funds just go straight back into all the builds. And if you haven't done so already, even just a simple subscribe to the channel is really appreciated because it's super helpful in getting the channel out there and obviously continuing to grow these projects so that we can take on more awesome builds down the line. I have been reading the comments, guys, and I tried to reply to all of you, and I know a lot of you want more regular uploads, but unfortunately with having a day job as well, trying to squeeze this all in is not easy. But rest assured, I'm doing everything in my power to bring these uploads to you as often as I can. Now, I do get asked, you know, what other content is out there like mine? And the stuff I enjoy watching is another channel called Bikes of Ride, very similar to me with old bike builds. And then there's another cool channel called Hoon TV Motorbikes that have done some, well, it's pretty new, but they've done an R1 retro mod build, which, wow, I really enjoyed that series. And then for those that really want the creme de la creme, like that put me to shame on this restoration stuff, is I think it's RRC, yeah, restorations, RRC restorations. So yeah, go and check those out if you're bored in between my videos, and obviously by supporting all of us YouTubers we can continue to grow these projects. So the dilemma, obviously, as you can see, the swing arm has been stripped down. I mean, wow, these linkages, the rust, the play and everything, it's quite scary really how bad that was, especially I'm sure, like, I know obviously this one was abandoned, but there's going to be a lot about on the road like that. And funnily enough, the chap Roy who bought my Aprilia RSV, the project one, he had the linkage rebuilt and he said the same thing. It wasn't in a great shape considering it felt solid on the bike. But yeah, I'm glad we're putting the replacement one on there. So the original plan was to use this swing arm This one's got some scratches and marks on it. Sadly, it's also got these bolts that hold the rear mudguard on have been sheared off on both sides. We saw what happened with the fork when I was trying to drill the alley, and it just ended up running through off the steel, unfortunately. So, I mean, these bearings in here, absolutely shot. These fully rebuilt. If I can drill this out, get these mudguard ones, because I want that rear mudguard fender on there, we'll use the good one. Otherwise, we've got to try and swap all the bearings over, which I just don't think is going to be an easy job, because it looks like they're pressed in there. From what I can see, they're proper tight in there. Yeah, so I suppose we get the drill out and see if I can release those, and maybe see if I can get a stud extractor in there as well. Unfortunately, it's just far from ideal. As you saw, we heated that one up to get the ones out of there, and they came out nicely. So, the joys. Stud extraction. Honestly, it has driven me mad on the time on this bike. Normally these are pretty straightforward jobs, but it just wasn't going to plan. And this one did exactly the same thing. So abandoning the nice polished swing arm with the snap bolts in it, I then reverted back to using the old grotty swing arm because we'd successfully removed the bolts for the fender from that one. I thought, you know what, we're just going to have to grin and bear polishing this for hours. So I began the work of completely stripping it down, ready for the restoration. So after degreasing one side of the swing arm, it was time to get onto that sanding. And I don't know what is wrong with this. Maybe someone can let me know in the comments. But the more I was sanding it, the more pitting became worse. I just kept seeing it and seeing it. So I thought, you know what? I'm just going to quickly grab a flappy wheel from the grinder because this is going to speed up the process. And as you can hopefully see here, it just didn't get better. It still looked worse under there. So I decided to abandon that swing arm, go back to the one with the snap studs in it, or snap bolts even, and try and sand out those scratches that were in it, because I certainly couldn't leave it like that. And pleased to report I managed to do it, but again, not a lot of this on camera because just hours went by for what felt like very little progress. Again, something from the earlier episodes is the bike didn't have the swing arm bobbins in. I actually found out these aren't threaded from factory. So I quickly got the tap and die set out and managed to get some new bobbins installed. It looks much better and suits that polished look of the swing arm, which then moves us on to trying to put things back together. Now, unfortunately, the RS125 chain guides I couldn't actually see for sale new. There were some 3D printed pattern ones, but I thought, you know what? Let's just have a quick look and see how they clean up. And I got to be honest, you could have easily have just thrown these in the bin, but as hopefully you can see here, they look absolutely fantastic after a quick wipe up. Finally, the swing arm was looking like a suitable part to go back on the build. Obviously, all those scratches had been removed. I'd gone through the whole wet and dry process of polishing back up. All new bushes had been fitted. The bolts that were all plated from the donor bike were all fitted. Everything was looking pretty good. So that now means we need to get the frame on the bench and take a look at the engine. Now, for those that followed in the earlier episodes, I was struggling a little bit to find details on the correct squish. I had a good chat with Paul at PGME and he said, look, get the barrel and head sent back to me. I'm going to try and work some magic in skimming the barrel back down so that we can get the correct squish for you. So aiming for 1mm, which is quite hardcore for road use. It's definitely not a daily from what I gather talking to Paul, but for the sort of use where it's a weekend toy for me, he'd worked absolute wonders in getting this barrel skimmed. And yeah, essentially I just needed to find the spacers to go back in the crankcases, which I had in the garage, and then it was time to start putting the engine back together. So with the cylinder head back from Paul at PGME, it was time to give it a good clean. Now it was relatively clean when I got it back, but I just wanted to be 100% sure there was no machining or swarf in there. So I used some brake cleaner and then pushed it all out with the airline. And then it was just a case of putting a nice little bit of lubricant or 2T oil on the barrel just to make sure it was nicely lubricated for when we slide it all back together. Then it's just a case of lining up the piston rings into the selected grooves on the piston and then simply slide the barrel over. Also added some two-stroke oil to the crown of the piston. This was just to make sure that everything was lubricated. It was nice to see that the crank also had lubrication on it previously. So essentially, because you never know, especially when you build your own wiring loom, we might have a time where it's just cranking for a little while without any actual running. So I wanted to just make sure that everything was correctly lubricated. Now on the two-stroke subject, I know I've had a few questions about the Honda Grom, the Hoonigan project. Where is it? Well, guys and girls, it's been at Performance Fabrications since September, but I'm really confident that it's going to be back within the next coming weeks, or at least I hope. It seems to be delay after delay, but fear not, there'll be plenty more two-stroke content coming to the channel this year. With the barrel all back on to the piston, it was time to go through the engine parts box and finally start getting this little powerhouse back together. Now, for those that saw in the previous episode, we had probably not the ideal compression. It was 1.5mm, and that's fine for just a generic road bike, but this is going to be a bit saucy. We want a bit more to it, a bit more power, especially with the big carb and hopefully some exciting stuff with the exhaust to come. So, as we mentioned, Paul had skimmed the barrel down and we were aiming for 1mm squish on the VHM head, which, as you'll see in the coming clips, happy to report we're well within tolerance. And whilst on the subject of bikes, for those of you that want to come either meet me or have a good day out around bikes, Brooklands is holding its annual motorcycle meet on Sunday the 7th of July, and I will be down there on a stand. So if you are on the area, come over and say hi, and hopefully I'll have a few of the projects down with me for the day. I'm sure, like many of you that tinker in the garage, we learn from our mistakes, and this preventative measure is something that's really worth doing, especially when you've still got an open bike. So essentially what I'm doing here is covering all the engine openings just in masking tape, just in case any dirt, crud, or even a screw or washer falls down into the engine, because it's definitely something you don't want when we're putting this back into the bike frame. Unfortunately, this turns out, especially as one man on his own on a hot summer's day, not to be a straightforward job on the RS125. Probably more because I didn't have a little engine lift. After some head scratching and a little bit of swearing, pleased to report we have the engine in place. It definitely would have made life a lot easier if I'd used a little engine jack. A little bit like this scissor lift, it has a bit of a platform. I really should invest in one. The problem is you use them so rarely and it's a big bulky thing just to have in the garage. So in this episode, I struggled on. At this point, I also made the decision that, do you know what, the sun's shining, I fancy going out for a rip on the bike. So me and my good friend Spence, who we reviewed his CBR 1000R Repsol, went over to Rikers Cafe to watch the MotoGP. In fact, we're actually going to watch the MotoGP live in Assen this year. So if anyone else is there, come over and say hi. I'm sure it's going to be a great time with plenty of bikes. But the question is, will my body survive doing that many miles on a sports bike? With a belly full from the Rikers Burger Special and a hot ride home, I really had to motivate myself to get back into this. But I know you guys have been wanting an upload, so I struggled on through the heat of the afternoon and got the swing arm and new shock into place. Pleased to report this all actually went together really nicely. With the rear end now complete and on the paddock stand, it was time to get the front forks back in. Again, if you haven't seen the previous episodes, the seals and the fluid have all been changed in these, so hopefully many years trouble-free service out of the front end or the bike overall, to be fair. Now, what I will say is the top yoke at this stage is just going back in to hold the fork assembly together, because I've got a little plan with that that's coming later in the episode. But pleased again to report all the front end assembly went back together absolutely lovely. As again in a previous episode, we did that little mini refurbishment on the rear subframe, which included using a wire wheel to just sand it all back down or bare it back down to raw metal and painted it, and it actually came out really well. Now we were going to need to put the rear subframe back in place because I wanted to start getting this bodywork on and see how our first fit is with the fiberglass kit. And it's nice always to see things come together after so many months of being apart. As you can see here, I'm having to drill out all the mounting points on the fiberglass kit. Again, because these kits are so cheap, these are just little jobs you've got to do yourself, and it actually allows for adjustment if you don't want to use factory mounting points. Pleased to report though, the fit on the rear subframe hump or tail unit is actually really good. I was expecting a lot worse, to be honest with you, but if you're expecting an OEM fit, it's not going to be the case. These are handmade and fiberglass, but for the cost, wow, it looks proper cool. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the episode, I had something in mind for the top yoke. And bear with me on this because it could have gone one or two ways. Now, the end result actually came out exactly how I hoped. I'm just not 100% sure if it's suited to the build, but let me know in the comments over the next couple of clips what you think. But essentially, I've gone with removing all the grime from the top yoke, sanding it all back down, and then getting it painted in a new coat of black, which looks absolutely lovely. Night and day difference before. But what I wanted to do was go with like a brushed top yoke and leave the black details with the Aprilia and the surround. Now, unfortunately, it's got like a hard anodized coating on it as factory. So once I'd gone through the paint that I had applied, I really struggled to wet and dry through the coating from factory. So I ended up using that flappy sanding wheel, which is quite aggressive for this job. But again, you can sand it back down, smooth it off, and then we applied some clear coat. And again, it came out exactly as I visioned. I'm just not 100% sure it suits the build. Let me know in the comments, guys. What do you think? Being extremely careful with the clear coat still being somewhat tacky, I refitted the top yoke and gave the top yoke nut a small refurbishment. The only bits left to do on this side of the bike was to reinstall the clip-ons, because now we were going to be getting ready to put it off the ramp and actually wheel it around. So it's going to need some handlebars. Continuing to work through that to-do list, the next job on the list was the front fairing stay. Just like the rear subframe, it was looking absolutely disgusting. Thankfully, no sort of permanent rust or rot, but a hell of a lot of surface corrosion. So again, using that wire wheel, sanded everything down, got it looking factory fresh with some primer and paint and clear coat, and then it was just a case of getting it all fitted back up, as this would allow us to mount the front fairing. But before we do that, I need to give the clocks and TLC as well, and I simply, again, like I've done in the previous video series, is used a product called ACF 50 just to coat everything in that, wipe it all off, and it really does transform plastics back to an OEM finish. With the fairing stay and clocks now on, it was time to get the nose cone on. This again was another thing I really wanted to get done on this job, because it's going to start taking some shape now and actually looking, hopefully, like a motorcycle again. And just like we did with the rear seat hump, you need to mark out or drill where you want your fixing points to go. So here there was a light indentation of where the original screen holes go, and as I'll be using a standard screen, I simply followed these, removed the original, and then fitted it in place. And again, it's not OEM finish, but it certainly ain't bad, especially for a race kit. Something you've probably noticed is I'm gonna need a new screen. I might try and wet sand this with 2000 wet and dry and machine polish it back, as I've restored headlights like this, but I think there's a few micro cracks in it. I'm a bit hesitant to use pattern screens because I generally find the quality's not great, but if anyone knows one that's similar to OEM and at a half decent price, get commenting. It'll be good to replace that if there's a feasible option available. I continue on with the same approach as the rest of the fiberglass, loosely placing stuff in position, marking it up and drilling it out. And again, it all goes together relatively nicely, which I'm impressed by. There were, though, which we discussed later in the video, some bits where I needed to do some trimming with the Dremel just to make sure it fitted as close as possible. But really, a big thanks to GRPone. They really have created a fantastic kit here. Now, they have advised that they're still working on the website. They are currently available to purchase on eBay, so I'll put all links in the description, or you can message them directly through Facebook Messenger on their page there. But again, it'll all be in the description for how you get hold of them if you need a race kit for your RS125, or in fact any other track bike, because they cover a whole host of models. As mentioned, you do need to occasionally do the odd bit of trimming. Nothing extreme, but again, it's just the way these have obviously come out of the mould. And as you can see here where I've coloured it in some black marker pen, it just needed a little bit shaved off so that that could sit nicely tucked back and out the way. Something else I'm going to be doing is actually spray painting the inside of the fairing all in black as well. So hopefully this will have a nice finished look. It won't be a raw fiberglass finish on the inside. But again, trust me guys, I've got a good feeling about this one. Yes, guys and girls, we have the wheels back on, and that means it's now a rolling chassis, one step closer to actually being a motorcycle. Sure, we've still got a lot of work ahead of us, but it's nice to see these stages come together with each episode that I upload to you all. Hopefully you're enjoying it, and as we mentioned, the end of August is my deadline, so I'm going to need to get it ready for being on the road. And to do that, I'm going to need motorcycle insurance. And as you guys already know, I've teamed up with BeMoto to be part of the affiliate scheme. So if you need your next policy, why not click the link in the description and see what BeMoto Insurance can do for you. If you end up purchasing a policy through the link, you'll also be supporting the channel. Thanks guys. So that's going to be a wrap for this episode, guys and girls. I mean, it's really coming together now. I mean, for a lot of you at home, probably thinking it still looks an absolute state. But for me, this is a big milestone. It's finally coming together, and I've got to hand it to GRPone. I'm well impressed with the bodywork. It's not a factory finish, and it never was going to be. Under £250 for the set. You wouldn't even get a side fairing for that. So if you're buying this kit expecting it to be OEM finish, it's not. But man, it looks perfect with that blanked off headlight. Wow. So yeah, let's get this wheeled outside, get the cover photo and some nice shots out in the garden. And this is probably going to be it for a few weeks because I'm pretty busy this month. But yeah, stay tuned because we've still got plenty more to come. I'm going to be honest, I'm absolutely in love with how this is turning out. It is so far exceeding my expectations. It looks awesome. Doesn't look as awesome as a Nex helmet, so if you do need your Nex crash helmet, why not check out the link in the description to see what Nex has available for you. Again, I'm part of the affiliate scheme with this, so if you purchase a helmet through my link, you'll also support the channel and these builds. Thanks guys.